Friends, today's NRI Summer program from Los Angeles brought to you commercial free by listeners like you. Your generous donations make possible for us to stay commercial free, and today's show is pre-recorded. If you have a question for the guest, please send an email to nrisummer@gmail.com. We will follow up with the guest and find the answer for you. Thank you for your support.
Friends, welcome to NRI Samay. This is Sri Hari Atluri, your host for today's show. Today we are talking with Dipti Batnagar. She is from Friends of the Earth International, Climate Justice and Earth and Energy Coordinator from Mocambique. Then we are talking about one of the issues is the climate change and what are the ill effects. So, Dipti, welcome to NRI Samay.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking this time. To begin with, actually I was about your name because it sounds Indian, and most of our listeners are Indian. So how come is there a background, Indian background, and how come you are in Mozambique? Maybe you can give some information.
Yes, very much so. I am from India. I was born in Kolkata and I live in Delhi. I also have some family who lives in US, but I'm married to a Mozambican, so I moved here a few years ago. So my work is based out of Mozambique now, but I have ties in India and US as well.
Excellent.
Global citizen.
Excellent. How did you meet Mozambique, or where did you meet?
Actually, it was through the work that I'm doing now. He is also an activist, and I'm an activist, and we met at a conference 11 years ago. So ours is what we call a movement love story. We met in the movement.
I see. Very interesting. Yeah, the first time I heard you, it was on Democracy Now. It's an US-based, radio channel, and you were doing the Amy Goodman was doing an interview with you, very short one, in Lima, Peru, during the COP. So then I saw your name and I thought you're from India. Then she said you're from Mozambique, so I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So you work at the Friends of the Earth International, and also, not sure if I say this correctly, Justica Ambiental, right? Justica Ambiental?
Yeah, it's Justiça Ambiental, which means environmental justice in Portuguese, which is the main language in Mozambique. So Friends of the Earth International is the largest environmental grassroots federation in the world, and we have members in about 74 countries, and Mozambique is one of them. So me, as the climate justice and energy coordinator, I'm hosted in Mozambique, and I work part-time for the national organization and part-time for the international. So I have a view of the climate change politics at the national level as well as at the international level.
I see. And how did you get into this climate activism, if for lack of a better word?
Climate change is the biggest issue that's facing our humanity at this moment of time. Even though there are many skeptics in the U.S. who don't believe the simple science, but they are absolutely wrong, because there is no doubt at this point that climate change is real and it is caused by humans, even though I know that the U.S. Senate recently agreed with the fact that climate change was real, but they didn't agree with the fact that climate change was caused by humans, which is, for the U.S. being one of the richest countries in the world, it's so plainly stupid that the policymakers and some part of the population doesn't understand basic science. But in any case, it is one of the biggest challenges that's facing our humanity, and it's the poorest and the most vulnerable people on the planet who are going to be affected. It's going to be India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. The Indian subcontinent is going to be devastated. Africa is going to be devastated. The huge land masses, like South America as well, are going to be the ones that face the biggest brunt. I mean, the Philippines has been hit by typhoons every year, and surprisingly enough, at the time when the climate change negotiations are going on. So it's because of that that I get involved in this work, because I see myself as a justice activist. So, of course, I'm from a middle-class background, but I want to be able to use my background and my privilege in service of those who are the most vulnerable and the most affected. And that's why I choose to work on this issue.
When you say some of these countries are going to be devastated, and you cited the example of the typhoons in Philippines and Indonesian areas, is that what you are talking about, or do you think it will get worse, or what do you think we will see in coming future?
It will definitely get worse. So last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was the IPCC, which is the highest scientific body on climate change research, they released their report all throughout last year, and the science is very clear that the impacts that were expected in the future are already being felt now. So the impacts in the future are going to be much worse. And it's going to be the most poorest, the most vulnerable people that are going to suffer the most. Like, for example, one of the things that will happen all across sub-Saharan Africa is that agriculture starts to shut down because the climate just doesn't cooperate anymore with the practices of subsistence farmers. And in the case of Mozambique, 80% of Mozambique's people are subsistence farmers. And Mozambique is one country, especially the southern part where we live, which is going to become drier. As you can imagine, when that climate changes completely, agriculture starts to suffer, and the most basic way that people take care of themselves and their families starts to fall apart. So it's a really, really big issue, and it's going to affect the people who didn't create the crisis. That, for me, that is the other reason for working on this. It is the developed countries, of course, not the communities which have recently immigrated to the developed countries like my family, but it's traditionally the communities who have been in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, who have created this crisis. Of course, the EU, how can I forget? And they're not the ones that are going to face the worst brunt of climate change, and not just that. They are all abdicating their responsibility. They created the crisis, but at this moment, in 2015, as we are heading to Paris, which is going to be a major stage for the negotiations, we are seeing the developed countries, US, leading the charge, who are reneging on their responsibility, who are running away from the fact that they created this crisis.
And the some of the effects you mentioned, especially about the agriculture, what is the time frame that you think this will happen? Do you think it's going to be in our lifetime, next generation, 100 years, 200 years? What is the scientist saying right now?
What the science is saying is that the effects are worse than previously thought. So it's not very specific in terms of, this is going to happen on this date, but definitely in our lifetimes, we will start to see the situation that is deteriorated a whole lot. Already, I mean, in India in 2013, in Uttarakhand, you had these massive floods that just wiped out huge areas. And we have colleagues in Nepal who work at Friendship in Nepal, and you have these glacial lakes which are filled with ice. And with climate change, the bottom starts to melt and they start becoming glacial lakes. And if that bursts, then it can wipe out a huge chunk of humanity on the Indian subcontinent. Here in Mocambique in 2013, we had 150,000 people displaced in southern Mozambique from floods. So we are talking about already, and of course, as we mentioned earlier, in the Philippines, all the typhoons, and not just that. You had Hurricane Sandy hitting the U.S. East Coast, and U.S. has seen an increase of floods, droughts, and wildfires. And Europe also is having heat waves like never before. And Germany had massive floods last year, 2014. So it's everyone that's seeing the impact right now already. And when I say, agriculture starts to shut down, it's already happening in a way because subsistence farmers already find it so difficult because of floods, because of droughts which are already occurring. So these are things that we are going to see in our lifetimes. And I shudder to think what the next generation is going to face because our ancestors and us, we have done a huge disservice to this planet and the future generations. And we are leaving them with a problem that I don't know if they can deal with because we are burying our heads in the sand right now. We, meaning collective world leaders, are burying their heads in the sand right now and not dealing with the problem. So I shudder to think how future generations are going to live their lives. They're going to have a significantly diminished standard of living because everything in their atmosphere, their environment is going to be impacted because of climate change.
Friends, NRI Samay is a non-profit independent alternate media from Los Angeles, USA, which brings positive stories from grassroots activists from all corners of India and across the world. NRI Samay does not rely on corporate funding and our shows are commercial free. We only rely on your donations. Corporate funded media is driven by the TRP rating and profits are blurring the distinction between news and entertainment. Why do our news channels talk so much about cricket, movies, accidents, popular figures' personal lives, babies of heroines, gossips, etc., while they should be covering the struggles of people, inequality in our society, rural issues, and border security issues? Why did our media raise some corruption crusaders to the sky on one day and shut them off completely when graft charges were raised on those corporate sponsors? Media relies so much on the corporate funding and government blessings that they cannot report independently. NRI Samay is different. We don't accept funds from any corporations and hence our shows are commercial free. We completely rely on donations from you. Please consider donating to NRI Samay and please go to nrisamay.com and donate generously. This is the only way together that we can continue NRI Samay. All donations are kept transparent on nrisamay.com. And if you have any questions, please write to nrisamay@gmail.com.
I see. And so for where we are at right now, and what is that these global leaders should do, or in fact, not even global leaders, but as common people, what is that we can do? And second thing is, what is that the large countries can do, the powerful countries?
Okay. What everyday people can do is to hold their governments accountable, because after all, we live in democracies, you and me both, and India as well. We need to be able to have good democratic governance structures and hold our leaders responsible for what they are doing. For the U.S., what this means is that the U.S. is one of the biggest culprits on the international stage right now, even though it appears there's a big pretense of, we all heard about the U.S.-China announcement last year, and there's a pretense that the U.S. is doing a lot on climate change. And I must admit, given the Senate and the Congress that Obama has, President Obama, the fact that he's able to do this much is a big deal. But the U.S. is one of the biggest culprits who are running away from their responsibilities. So our job as activists and as common people everywhere is to hold our leaders accountable and say, look, you are the ones that created this crisis and you are running away from it, and we are going to leave future generations with a bill for this. So we need to do something about it. And what to do about it? The solutions are really clear, actually. We need an energy transformation. We need to change the way that we produce, distribute, and consume energy. There is absolutely no doubt that without an energy transformation, we can pretend all we want, but we cannot stop climate change. So that's a really, really fundamental issue, and that's one of the main things that we fight on. In Mozambique, we have our partners in U.S. doing the same, and all across the world. Friends of the Earth groups are fighting against dirty energy, which is, of course, the fossil fuels, the coal, fracking, oil, gas, but also many other harmful projects like nuclear, which pretend to be carbon neutral, but have a huge carbon footprint and will create enormous problems in the future, and are already creating. I mean, we all know what happened in Japan. So we need to see an energy transformation, and for us, the energy vision is that we want energy in the hands of communities. Renewable energy solutions that are owned and operated by communities. And this is not something way in the future. It's already happening.
Right.
Many of our member groups, our people, our communities in Europe, in Palestine, in Colombia are working on energy sovereignty solutions. There are community power projects. For example, in Scotland, they're doing a wonderful job with wind energy cooperatives. It's cooperatives owned by people, and they're generating electricity from wind and being able to use it locally. That's the kind of thinking that we want to create, especially for countries like Mozambique and India, who have huge populations without access to electricity. And I worked for many years with communities in India as well, and it's so shocking to me that, like, for example, Singrauli is a place where so much energy is generated from historically, right, for many, many years. And there's communities right next to Singrauli who never had a light bulb in their house. So India and Mozambique and US for that matter have followed a development path which benefits elites at the cost of people. That's why we've had huge centralized projects, mega dams, big coal-fired power plants, and now with Obama, going to India and signing this nuclear deal, it's really shameful that now India is going to push nuclear, which is last thing on earth that we should be doing. We should be instead putting energy in the hands of communities. That's the way to get energy to people who don't have it.
Yeah.
Let's not pretend that, big centralized projects always said that, we are going to provide energy to the poor. And it never ever happens because the development model is not that. It goes to the industrialists on the way. So we are talking about a fundamental change of the energy system. This is the only thing that is going to stop climate change. These tiny, tiny changes. I mean, I really appreciate, and we try to do that in our own home, is to change our light bulbs and to reduce our personal carbon footprint.
Exactly.
But, Srihari, there's a limit to which personal actions can change such large systemic issues. I mean, this is a huge systemic concern, and we need to be able to change systems. That's why I'm saying we need to hold our policymakers responsible to make large-scale changes.
Yeah.
While we continue to do our part, but our main part is educating ourselves, educating our communities, and holding our governments responsible.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, personal responsibility also goes the long way, because then when you feel it, when you know the ill effects of even throwing a lot of trash, producing a lot of trash, where is it going? When you think about end to end, then you just get more educated, I guess. But other than that, you mentioned about Obama's deal with China, and China is one of the countries which is pretty badly hit by the pollution, right? The Chinese major cities are all, there's a dirty wave going on there.
Yes, I mean, China followed the exact same development path which we were just talking about that India did, and now Mozambique is doing the same thing. In front of my eyes, I can see the same centralized project, dirty project that benefit elites and leave the majority of the people in the dust. So, of course, China followed a very similar policy of large-scale, very energy-intensive, very dirty projects, and they are seeing the impacts of that because the environment will not lie. I mean, the environment will show you the truth of what you are doing, and they have huge issues with water pollution, air pollution. I mean, the city of Beijing is constantly covered in smoke because of the coal-fired power plants all surrounding it.
Yeah.
But there's one thing about China that people in the U.S. need to understand, because the U.S. government has made a very concerted effort to make China into a demon. And I was listening to Obama's speech last September when UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon held a climate change summit in New York. And of course, that was right after the biggest climate march in history, which took place in New York as well.
Yeah.
And President Obama was giving his speech at the Ban Ki-moon summit, and he was saying, U.S. and China, we are the two biggest emitters. And it's a lie. It's actually a lie, because what that statement hides is historical responsibility. It's the fact that U.S. is a historical emitter. It's not just about what is happening today. It's about the emissions. The date for starting to count emissions is 1850. And the U.S. and the EU and Australia, Japan, etc., they have historical emissions. They are the ones who have historically created the problem. I'm not saying that China's mode of development is great. I think it's absolutely terrible. And there are allies within China in a very difficult situation, but they are trying to change that from within. But the U.S.'s strategy of pointing fingers at China and saying, U.S. and China, we are the two biggest emitters, is basically a lie, because it's trying to hide this most basic principle which comes out of the Rio Convention. So 1992 Rio Convention called for common but differentiated responsibilities, which means we all have a responsibility. All 192 countries who are signed on to the convention have a responsibility to this planet, but some have a bigger responsibility because they created a bigger part of the problem. And what the U.S. has consistently tried to do for the last 5 years, since the climate change negotiations in Copenhagen in 2009, is to demolish historical responsibility. So when the U.S. says that China is one of the biggest emitters in the world, they mean one of the current biggest emitters in the world, but not historical. And that's the difference that we are trying to maintain, that yes, we want India, China, Mozambique, South Africa, Brazil, we want these countries to change their development pathway. We want people-centered development that focuses on what people need, not on what elites need, not export-oriented development. But we cannot say that these countries have an equal role to play in creating the climate crisis as the U.S. and Europe, because it's just not true.
Yeah.
So that's one fight that we're continuing to have on the international level.
Yeah, now that you mentioned about nuclear...
Sorry if I'm talking too much.
No, that's all good information. I was saying now that, you were talking about the nuclear deal that India is making with the U.S., one of the issues there is that, the Obama said he's going to put a cap on the limit of on the liability of the U.S. companies who are going to establish these nuclear projects. So the cost is paid by the Indians there, and the benefit, obviously, when they set up these companies, they are going to get the benefit, U.S. companies. Second issue that's happening right now in India is that the new government, Modi's government, has promised the Make in India. So he's inviting all the big companies outside of India to come to India and set up their shops there. So we'll have to wait and see, how is this, where is this energy coming from, how much damage it's going to be for the environment, because they are clearing the environmental clearances for these companies pretty easily. They have deregulated it. So we'll have to see what happens in the next coming years. But I also want to touch base on the Paris Convention, the climate convention that's coming up. And what is that you are looking forward to? Do you think there will be any big news there that we can expect?
Sorry, did you ask about Paris?
Yeah, Paris Convention. What is that we can expect from this?
Yeah. Actually, just want to say a quick word on the nuclear before that. I mean, we don't have to wait and see what's going to happen. I think we already know. If a country like Japan, with all of its technology, can have a disaster like Fukushima, then it's absolutely atrocious that India, for me, as an Indian, it's absolutely atrocious that India is going ahead with nuclear when the energy future needs to be completely different. And India can pretend like nuclear is a low carbon energy source, but it's completely wrong. It's a lie. So we don't have to wait to see what's going to happen. History has shown that nuclear is a really terrible option, and there are communities in India who are fighting against it. So we will stand with those communities who are challenging these sort of warped developments. Yeah. Coming back to what's happening this year, so, Shriyari, there's a really big hype happening all across different NGOs, in all of these spaces that I'm in, for example, you see this, road to Paris. Yeah. And it scares me a little bit because this is exactly the situation that happened before Copenhagen in 2009. There was expected to be a big deal, and, everyone was preparing for it, and there was 100,000 people on the streets of Copenhagen. There was a big mobilization. And what happened? President Obama jetted in, and he brought a so-called solution which actually derailed the entire negotiations, and it has not recovered for the last 5 years. So the climate justice movement also had a really huge dip of morale after that, because we organized so much. We put so many people on the street that it felt like, oh God, we failed. What has happened? Because Copenhagen was so devastating. I can't tell you what a horrible role the U.S. played in Copenhagen. And literally the last 5 years, the climate change negotiations have been going from bad to worse, starting at that moment in Copenhagen. So I am really worried when people say, this road to Paris is going to be such a big deal. There are some online sites which have been circulating petitions saying we have 10 months to save the world. And it's really scary, because if you say we have 10 months to save the world, then what we are actually saying is that Paris is going to do something to save the world. And I want to tell your listeners right now that it is not the case. Yeah. Paris is going to be a highly, highly compromised deal. It's going to go against the interests of developing countries, because that's what we have seen in Lima, in Warsaw. In Warsaw COP 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, about 800 of us walked out from the negotiations saying that this is completely captured by corporates. And coming back to what you were saying about nuclear, the U.S. government, the Indian government, and the international decision-making structures like the UN are completely captured by corporate interests. That's why they listen to the polluters and not to the people. And we know that this is the case, and let nobody think that they don't need to do anything because their world leaders, their governments are going to be meeting in Paris and they're going to sign a deal that's going to save the world. It's absolutely not true. We need citizen action between now and Paris to put pressure on our governments. As I was saying earlier, we need to educate ourselves and put pressure on our governments so that they go there with the right mandate. But let us not pretend that anything is going to save the world, because it's far from the truth. There's a lot of work to be done, but the good thing is that the solutions are in the hands of people, not in the hands of governments, or if they are, they're avoiding them and going for horrible solutions like nuclear. But the people, as I was saying earlier, the community energy movement that's happening in many parts of the world, in the case of agriculture, industrial agriculture does not treat the world and it creates a huge amount of carbon emissions. Instead, we have small-scale farmers going for what is called agroecological solutions. And that is what is going to save the world. It's the solutions, small-scale solutions that people have in their hands. Even some of the most vulnerable people, what they are doing is what is going to be the future of this world. And if the leaders don't see it, then our message to them is get out of the way. Let people take the charge and do our people's solutions.
Absolutely. And I really look forward to what Paris Convention will come out with, and we'll see. It'll this year. Are you going to be there? And what are the dates?
The Paris negotiations start from 30th of November until the 12th of December. But of course, a lot of what happens in Paris will already get decided beforehand. So
yeah.
By May already there will be a draft text. And we will be keeping an eye on it. I mean, we are building people's power, but we are also keeping an eye on what is happening in the policy space, because if there is anything really problematic, like if there is anything against the interests of developing countries, then we will stand up against it. We will denounce it.
Absolutely. It was excellent talking to you. You shared a lot of great information. I really thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Friends, if you liked today's show, please go to youtube.com/NRI Samay and click on the subscribe button. You will get notified every time we publish a new show. And you can also like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google+.